Today I'm sharing this modern dresser makeover with chalk paint. This is what the dresser looked like before. We picked it up from an ad on Facebook Marketplace, and it was in pretty good condition other than this damaged corner. First, I removed the old hardware with my electric screwdriver. I tried to pry off the fake keyhole cover on the top drawer, but it was really stuck on. So I decided to just paint over it. I planned to clean up the hardware and put it back on, so I didn't fill in any of the hardware holes. But one of the top drawer pulls was broken, so I filled in the holes on the top drawer so then I could put on new hardware on the top drawer. I filled them in with Quickwood, which is my favorite product to fill hardware holes and to repair damage. Quickwood is a 2-part epoxy that's the consistency of clay. It dries hard in about an hour and it doesn't shrink and crack like most wood fillers do. While I had the Quickwood out, I also shaped it around the broken corner to fill in the missing wood. While I waited for the Quickwood to dry, I cleaned the whole dresser with Crud Cutter and an old damp rag to get rid of any dirt, oil, or grime that was on it. I didn't want any of these things to interfere with the paint being able to stick to the dresser. After the Quickwood was dry, I sanded the Quickwood down smooth and to a better shape. Then I scuff sanded the rest of the dresser with a fine sandpaper pad just to remove the shine. I used my shop vac with the hose and brush attachment to remove most of the dust that was left behind, and then a tack cloth to pick up the rest of the dust. Even though I'm using chalk paint on this dresser, I still really like to prime before painting. Not necessarily to help the paint stick, because this chalk paint will stick to a scuff sanded wood surface pretty well on its own. But I like to prime to prevent bleed-through stains from showing up in my paint. Bleed-through is only really prevented by using the right kind of primer, and a shellac-based primer is my go-to for blocking it. This clear shellac is specifically my go-to primer to prevent bleed-through. I use it on almost everything. I also have a video coming up soon on bleed-through and why it's so important to prime to prevent it, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. I sprayed on 2 coats of shellac all over the dresser, letting it dry for at least an hour between coats. And then I let it dry overnight before I painted. Then I was finally ready to paint. I picked out this gorgeous deep moody green from Country Chic paint called Hollow Hill. I poured it into a separate container and added a little bit of water to thin it out just a little bit, because Country Chic paint and basically any chalk paint in general is pretty thick stuff. Adding some water helps prevent some of the brush marks because it makes the paint take a little bit longer to dry. I brushed the paint all over the dresser with my favorite round paintbrush from Zebra. Honestly, I love spraying paint with my paint sprayer instead of brushing it on. But this time, I just wanted to use my paintbrush. But I really do not like brush marks on my furniture, so I still tried to do what I could to minimize them. I worked in smaller sections and tried to brush it on with long brush strokes from edge to edge before moving on to the next section. I pulled out the drawers so I could paint all sides of them and just painted really carefully on the edges so I didn't get paint on the drawer boxes. When everything was painted with one coat, I wrapped my brush with plastic wrap to keep it from drying out in between coats. And then I let the paint dry. It only took about an hour before I could paint the second coat. This paint has pretty good coverage and needed only 2 coats to get full coverage, even after I thinned it out. After the second coat was dry, I sanded everything down to help remove any brush marks that were made. And then things took a turn for the worst. Like I said earlier, I love spraying with my paint sprayer, and the best way to get a really nice, smooth, top-coated finish is to spray it. but I really wanted to try a new way of spraying top coat on. For another option for those who don't have access to a paint sprayer. So I grabbed a spray can of Varathane's polyurethane in a satin finish and went to town. I sprayed 2 coats of it, and I just absolutely hated the finish. It was really, really matte, and it wasn't very even at all. Maybe that was user error. Typically, I love Varathane's poly. Actually, that's what I use in my paint sprayer, but the spray can version for me just didn't work at all. And to add to it, there were brush marks in the paint. Way more brush marks than I care for. I wish I had gotten a picture or a video of it, but I think I was just so over this project that I didn't take anything. So I set the dresser aside for a few weeks because I was just so over it. And when I came back to it, I was ready to tackle what I did not like about it. First, I took the time to pry off the keyhole detail on the top drawer that I wasn't digging. Then I sanded everything back down, really going to town to remove the brush marks even more. And then I removed the dust and I lightly brushed some more paint on the areas that needed more paint. Then I went back to my tried and true method of top coating chalk paint. I filtered the water-based poly into my paint sprayer and added a tiny bit of water to thin it out a little bit. I like to add some water, not necessarily because my paint sprayer can't spray it, but the added water makes it so then it takes a little bit longer to dry, which helps it lay flat and smooth better. Then I sprayed 3 coats of poly all over the dresser, letting it dry for a few hours in between coats. I scuff sanded lightly between coats of poly with fine grit sanding pads to help the finish feel silky smooth. And I also sprayed the tops and sides of the drawers with 3 coats of poly by pulling them out just a little bit, just enough to spray them. After the poly was dry, I started to put the original hardware that I had cleaned up back on, but I really was just not feeling it. So I switched gears and made new leather poles for the drawers. You can get all of the details on how I make these leather poles in my DIY leather drawer poles video that I'll link here. The only difference is that I made them into handles instead of poles with 2 screws instead of just 1. The old hardware holes on this dresser were 5.5 inches apart, and I cut the leather at about 7.5 inches, so the leather would bend out enough so then anyone would be able to grab onto it. Before I share what the dresser looks like now, take a minute to hit the like and subscribe button so you'll be notified when we have new videos. So here is what the dresser looked like before. It was alright, and here is what it looks like now. It wasn't the easiest piece or the quickest makeover I have ever completed, but sometimes that's just what happens when you try something new. And I love how it came out in the end. That's all that matters, right?